for the webinar. All right. You see, in our industry, it's easy to get swept up in latest trends, buzzwords, and so-called best practices. But tonight, we're hitting the pause button. We're going to cut through the clutter and zero in on what actually moves the needle in your CRO efforts. My name is Vlad, the social lead here at Convert, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to what promises to be an eye-opening session. Today, our topic is Leave the CRO Echo Chamber. And to lead us through, we have the incredible Haley Carpenter. Haley is a true force in the CRO world, from her time at Spiro to finding Chirpy. She's helped major brands rethink their CRO strategies and achieve remarkable outcomes. Her approach, it's all about substance over style, and she's here to share some hard-earned insights. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Haley Carpenter. Haley, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that nice intro. I'm so excited to be here. I don't know if you've seen any of the marketing, y'all, across different platforms, but I get pretty heated about these topics. I love them. So we are in for a good time, I think. But as Vlad said, we are talking about some things that either get overhyped or too much buzz, and then I'll tell you some things that are worthy of more attention. And so as Vlad said, I've been in the industry for hot minute now, and I won't tell you too much about me. I don't want to waste time on this, but if you want to check out more about what I'm doing with Chirpy, check out mychirpy.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I always love doing that and talking more with people there. And Chirpy offers CRO consulting and execution services for CRO, and that really just breaks down into user research and testing. But enough about that. Check it out if you're interested. I do want to quickly touch on this. A reminder, one person who signed up for this webinar will get a free 30-minute session with me to talk about whatever is on your mind relative to CRO. So after this is over, we will select the winner and reach out to you. So keep an eye out for that. But enough setup, let's get into who this is for. So I think that's always a good starting point when talking about CRO because there are so many varying levels of people within CRO. So really, today I do feel that this conversation is for anyone in CRO or on the periphery of CRO, kind of looking in and interested. I think three main profiles stand out to me. So if you're not happy with CRO results in the past, you've tried it, you've done it, you're doing it now, and you're not happy, this is definitely for you. Don't blame CRO. CRO gets a lot of flack sometimes for things that it's not CRO's fault. I guarantee you something wasn't being done right, so let's figure it out. I know at least one thing in this will be for you to improve your results. Like I said, if you've never done CRO before, if you're curious, if you're just now ramping it up, awareness of these now is everything. So this is definitely for you. And if you're already a CRO pro sitting here like, I didn't know if this was for me, I pretty much know all the things. Well, this is still for you because I talk to CRO pros all the time that mess these up still, even if they've been doing it for years. And honestly, we're still debating amongst ourselves constantly. So it is important that you still get this information, I think, so that you have informed, well-rounded opinions. Maybe you get some more new kind of perspective that you can add to why you think something. So it's for everyone. I'm glad you're here. If you're here, please stay. I think you'll get something. And I do want to emphasize, I constantly, like I said, see these things being not approached correctly, done incorrectly. And really, truly, I feel that if you're not approaching all of what is in here today properly, it is really the equivalent of you just taking buckets of money and flinging it out the window, or flushing it down the toilet, or lighting it on fire. And who wants those things? No one. That's terrible. And it is insanely frustrating when I see it sometimes when, it just continues to happen, or obviously teams get frustrated. So a lot of this in here today will help you save some of that money in your CRO efforts. So like I said at the beginning, we're talking about a couple of topics that I think get overhyped or overcomplicated. And really, there are consequences to that. I'll show you what the topics are here in a minute, my full list. But, we get some bad results and underperformance, like I've been talking about. If these things get overly complicated or kind of not hashed out, people don't even want to do CRO. They don't buy into CRO. There's more errors, misinformation, confusion, takes longer to get ramped up, and everyone just gets frustrated. So let's figure these out. Like I said, I'm excited today about this. So I ran a poll preliminarily on LinkedIn. Yes, I know it is not a statistical significance, but it's an interesting pulse that we can get, perhaps. So I asked, what is the most common CRO topic that gets overcomplicated in other people's opinion? I'm honestly not surprised by this. Personalization was clearly the top choice. I was actually really happy to see that, and I'll explain why here in the next couple of slides. That's first on my list to talk about. Then forecasting and annualizations. Again, really happy to see that in the second place slot, and then we kind of go down from there. So without further ado, here's my big list. Personalization right at the top, in quotes for a reason that I will explain. Forecasting and annualizations, primary metric choices, governance, and who owns CRO, and then web versus full stack products. Let's just jump straight into it. I do want to note, though, just because I'm calling these topics out in this way, I am not suggesting to ignore these, never talk about them again, not talk about them still tomorrow. I am just simply suggesting to perhaps spend less effort and time on some or all of them, and to just hurry up and hash them out. Because with a lot of these, I see just way too much effort and time being spent on them. People get hung up on them. People have continuous arguments about them, and they just can't move forward or take action or come to an agreement. So let's just kind of hurry it up. Let's get through it, because there are other more important things, I think, to spend time on, at least often, in a lot of cases that I see with clients, that I will get to after we get through my list of rants. That's what I'm calling it, my list of rants. So without holding us up too much more, let's get into personalization. So this is in air quotes because it has so many different meanings. Depending on who you talk to, you will probably get one variation of one of those meanings. And so really what it boils down to is that it's just simply plain old segmentation. And this is where I'm saying, please stop overcomplicating it. And honestly, people use the term personalization incorrectly all the time. And really, it is just another lane within testing. It is not separate. It does not live in a separate roadmap. It is not a replacement for testing. It is within the same bucket. So like I'm saying, don't overcomplicate it. And I think that this is really something that people think is some giant silver bullet. It's some fancy shiny toy that people throw out because they think it's the hot thing. No, it's not. It's not. It's just another lane of testing. Still do it, absolutely. It's worth it. It gets great results, but don't overcomplicate it. And I do like to say that personalization is often, at least how teams talk about it, or the ways that they want to do it, more complicated and advanced. The industry is really not that mature across the board, how a lot of people think that it is. So what I tell teams, if they're really hung up on personalization, like this is the thing, we need to spend more time on this. Okay, well, start at a basic level. But honestly, teams that bring this up don't even have basic A/B tests launched. That is step one. Get a regular A/B test out the door, get a couple out the door, have success with those, and then get more complicated, then get more advanced. But don't put the cart before the horse. Also, one other point about personalization is that when you do it at scale, I've never seen it done efficiently and effectively, and I will have a slide on this in a minute to better explain what I mean by this. And I do actually want to give a couple examples of what I mean by personalization is just segmentation. Personalization can be done in a lot of ways, and we can personalize things to users based on many different characteristics like product interests, activities, behaviors, demographics, so on and so forth. And a lot of terms that get used interchangeably are personalization, recommendations, again, that segmentation. To me, it's really all talking about the same shit. And people might come at me for these opinions on personalization, but as you saw in the poll, I do think a lot of people would agree that, you know, it is overcomplicated. It really is just often kind of sold as a snake oil. So know that. And like I said, it's not different or separate from regular testing. It is not a replacement. It's not a silver bullet. I cannot say that enough. And now I want to get into personalization scaled often equals disaster. Maybe AI will change this. I really want to get into the next slide to show you this. And then also something that we'll talk about more in a little bit is that tools kind of help maybe with the personalization by saying that they have the ability to manage that complexity when scaled to avoid the disaster that I will talk about or visualize here in a second. In my opinion, tools that help with this do not really, at the level that you need it to, at least at that scaled level, when you try and take it big. Also, related issue with the tools that I see a lot, honestly, all of them that I've talked to, investigated, the stats models and how they are doing what they are doing behind the scenes is either completely questionable, which there are tools out there which I won't use because the stats do not make sense to me, the approach does not make sense to me, or the inner workings, even if they look like they make sense and are okay, are still often a black box, and we do not have full visibility into how they're working, which I do not like. I like to fully understand or understand as much as possible, and have transparency relative to what's going on. So things to think about with that. Again, I'm not saying that it's not worth doing or that tools are not worth using, and that it doesn't work. Not what I'm saying. So when we think about it at scale, this is one humongous issue relative to personalization that teams do not think about, that they just gloss over, I think, often and think, oh, we'll figure it out, is when you kind of extrapolate this out of when you want to do it at a huge scale. Seriously, I'm not kidding. No one has ever had a solution to this when I ask them and pose this problem to them. No one, not one person, not one tool. I'm all ears. If you have something, please reach out to me. I want to talk to you. So this is just a small screenshot or snapshot of the complexity of what this could look like. So then just kind of multiply this graph out or this chart. Your head's going to blow up. So let's say, okay, we want to have a segment, just what we're talking about, one segment here on the homepage where we want to have, let's say, a thing of recommendations. Fine, easy to manage. Okay, let's say then we want to add a couple of variations. So let's say homepage, our segment, let's just talk about returning users. And then we have those 4 variations here in this second column where we want to show different things, maybe based on a couple other parameters. And then you kind of keep going. So then let's say you get to the PDPs eventually, and you have variations of those, and you're sending different lanes to those. And then you go to maybe throw in PLPs. Like, it gets so complicated that your head's going to blow up. And project management is already hard enough for teams at basic levels. So I have not seen a tool to manage this. I haven't seen a tool on the marketing side, the product side with developers, because imagine rolling out sprints and updates and things to all these different segments across a website. How are you going to do that and keep track? Just think about it. Okay, I'm gonna get off my rant of personalization. We're already 15 minutes in. Overcomplication number 2, forecasting and annualizations. There might not be anything else that pisses me off often more than this, because if you see forecasting, by that, I mean, let's say that you're telling someone that you can get a certain lift in performance in, let's say, maybe a certain amount of time. And you're like, I can definitely do this. Let's say you guarantee it even, which is worse. Like I see on the, like you see here on the left, I'm not trying to call out any company, so I absolutely am not saying where these came from, but there are real examples in the wild. And I wanted to show that this is out there, like real examples. We all know that this is complete and utter BS. I'm trying not to curse too much in this. Everyone knows it. I've asked behind closed doors. I've asked at conferences. And I'm like, okay, I'll hear you out. Like, what is your model? How do you come up with these projections? How do you guarantee them? No one has a way. No one has a way. Same with annualizations. Here's what I mean by that. Test annualizations. Of course, we all want to have results that we can use in sales and marketing and show off our awesome work and make ourselves look good to help get more business. But the only revenue results that you should be attributing to your tests are the performance numbers that you got during the time of the test. That is it. It stops at the end of the test. You do not stop the test and then use some kind of made up model to say, well, we got this client X amount in additional monthly revenue for X amount of time or forever. We got an X% uplift for this client for the next year, whatever. That is complete baloney as well. So don't overcomplicate it. The answer here is don't do either. There is no other answer. People will do this, obviously. I have examples here in the wild, but just don't do it. And if you have bosses, higher ups, anyone on your team is forcing you to do these, is still asking you to do these when you explain what I'm explaining here, that is almost always tied to cultural issues within a company and misunderstandings, which can be kind of a long-term thing that you have to work out. But ultimately, for CRO, at least for CRO, you should not be doing these things. And if you see stuff like this out in the wild, you should know that it's BS. Please spread the word. Please spread the word. Okay, next rant. Test primary metric choices often also gets very overcomplicated. It should not be that hard. This also is one of the most important topics. If you forget everything else that I say here, pick this one or the last one to remember. And what happens is, I see a lot, teams will go after things like button clicks, video plays, click-throughs, page views, like the list I have here on the right, for a number of reasons. I'm going to save time and not go through all those reasons right now, but know that teams do this, or they go after money metrics. Granted, this conversation is typically in the context of marketing with marketing teams, typically in the context of websites. So this conversation shifts and looks a little bit different if we go outside of that. Just remember. But then there are teams that do go after what I call the money metrics, which are down funnel metrics tied to the bottom line and the money, like form submissions, leads, MQLs, transactions, so on and so forth. And this argument, I am very clearly on, please go after the money metrics. Why else are we here? I want to call out that if you pick those BS metrics, I think something that teams most often do not think about is that, let's say button clicks go up, funnel entries go up. Amazing, that looks great. And it's easier and faster to test with those, sure. But those can go up and your money, transactions, leads, whatever it is, can still go down. So let's say that you're basing your entire program on these BS metrics. You've been testing for 6 months and you're like, we're killing it. But then at the end of the 6 months, your website conversion rate overall goes down. You're like, what is happening? Why? We're doing so well. Well, you didn't base your program on the money metrics, or you didn't make choices based on those. Huge problem. In my opinion, if you are basing a program on BS metrics, you are wasting your time. Also, one other thing, teams have internal debates about what primary metrics should be, what they should base success on, and then they will test anyways, and then they will keep going. You cannot go anywhere if you don't know where you're going. Impossible. You will be running in circles like this little tiny hamster until you figure it out. So please figure this out first. This is like step 1, precursor to pretty much any other work, not just primary metrics, but all measurement, which is a whole other conversation in depth. But at least the primary metric, please have it figured out. And this is tied to one of the things that I'll talk about here in a bit. You cannot test if you don't have enough data volume. Plain and simple. It's not up to you. It is up to the data. Also, test speed depends on data as well. Plain and simple. How do you figure this out? Pre-test calculations. If you don't know what that is, big problem. We're going to talk about it here in a little bit. Also, some people will manipulate primary metric choices AKA they will choose BS metrics over money metrics because usually BS metrics are higher up in the funnel. There is more traffic and more data volume because obviously as you go down the funnel, people are dropping off, so there's less to work with. And by manipulate, I mean they choose those so that they're like, if we don't have enough down funnel traffic and data volume, well, at least we can test at all with these higher funnel ones so that we don't have to not test in the first place. Wrong answer. If you don't have the data volume, in my opinion, this is generalized, so of course there's nuance, but in my opinion, most of the time, if you don't have the data volume down funnel, you don't test. There is no let's go up the funnel and test anyways. Get more data and then you can test. Otherwise, you have to go to research and other validation methods. Okay, number 4, governance and ownership. This isn't the biggest one, but I did want to call it out because I would say over the past couple of years, I've seen a lot of talk about who owns CRO and governance. It is absolutely important. I'm not saying push off this conversation, this topic, but don't overcomplicate it and don't pause or hold off on things because you're not sure who's owning it entirely. Like there can be some figuring of it out along the way. And also later, it can be a long game. So if you're like, does product own it? Does marketing own it? Does the CRO team own it? Do we even have one? Do we need to hire one? Same with growth. Like there's all these swirling things. It's kind of like the argument of what should CRO be named? Does it need a different name because CRO isn't maybe that accurate or it's misleading? There's so many like big topics, and just don't get too hung up on this. Worry about actually doing the work and tie this into it, right? Last thing, web versus full stack. Again, I'm not saying this isn't important. However, I would say, in my experience in working with tools and having a lot of tool conversations and what do we buy versus not buy, and having a lot of interactions with salespeople for different testing tools, there are a couple of things I want to call out here. 1, do not get duped and screwed over by a tool salesperson, and do not get too hung up on web versus full stack. And by that, I mean, please do not just go ahead and be like, well, we'll just get full stack because you're like, it'll be good to have around. It's usually expensive as shit. So make sure that you're going to use it. And that's what I mean by that. And really what I mean here, the biggest thing, and please don't get duped by a tool salesperson. And I'm not saying this relative to Convert. I'm not saying that they're duping anyone here. This is just like a general awareness thing because I have seen it. I'm again not saying with Convert, but I've just generally seen it in the industry. Don't get duped because a lot of tools will say with web, you don't need a developer to run tests. As practitioners, we all know that that is not true. Granted, I'm not blaming the salespeople necessarily that do this. I'm not saying they're doing it to be manipulative. I'm just, usually it is, they are not the ones actually doing the CRO work. So they're just going off of their sales training and, they just often don't know better. So just know that pretty much any tool for a test, you're going to need a developer, contrary to what you'll hear. And if you are getting by in web without one, congratulations. But at some point, it almost always means that your test ideas then are too small, not complicated enough. You're not doing enough at once, so on and so forth. So that would be a flag to me. That would be a problem. And if you don't have developer resources, like if you don't have money, and you just can't, and you're getting by, let's talk about it if it's worth it. But just something to think about. And if you're like, Haley, what is web versus full stack? Here's just a quick screen grab of an explanation of full stack. Web is just more surgical and in kind of one lane. Full stack can go across a lot of lanes and have a lot more capability. I'm not going to dive too much into it here, but there is a difference. So if you aren't aware of these, definitely know what they are. And if you get into sales conversations and start trying to look for tools and things, and you aren't 100% sure what you're talking about with the tools person, or you have questions or want to double check something, like seek outside advice. Don't just sign for big amounts of money and then not know what you signed for. That happens all the time too, and it's terrible because a lot of teams waste money. Okay. Last point here is that full stack is great. But even if you're a really big team with a lot of budget and you're like, whatever, we'll just buy it and have it. Again, please don't unless you know that you're going to use it. Also, like I said, don't get too hung up on this, because even if you're like, well, we might use full stack, they're not going to tell you no if you just add it later. So be conservative. Start with web. If you are doing web testing, of course. If you're not, then obviously that's a different conversation. Start with web if you're not sure about full stack. Worry about actually doing the work in there first, and then add full stack. They're not going to like not take that upsell. Just add it later. Okay, rants over about those 5 things. Now, if you're like, okay, we get it. Is there anything in your opinion that does actually merit more attention than it gets, kind of on the flip side of that? Well, absolutely. Of course, I did ask a LinkedIn poll about this as well. Yes, I know it's not a statistical significance, but I was really happy to see in the polls that I did get, research-based ideation was at the top, and I love this. Granted, in my mind, these are all, there's a lot of these that are kind of equal. I was really bummed that pretest calculations did not get more votes. I would say this is like equally as important, if not more important, than the research-based ideation. Velocity definitely should not be over pretest calculations. Test analysis and interpretation should not be over pretest calcs, because if you don't have the beginning steps right, the end steps do not matter. So interesting. This is my list. I'm not going to read through it. We'll just get into it. And these, I truly believe that they will take you to a whole nother place. They will level you up. A lot of them immediately if you start doing them. So let's get into it. I'm calling this my radar list. So have these on your radar. Just put them in there. If they're not in there, put them on there. Put them on the radar of your team. The first one is tools, statistical models. I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to who do not look into this at all. And I think that's wild, because they do not all have the same models. And it absolutely matters relative to how you run tests in a lot of different ways. So you should know, if you have a tool, what this looks like behind the scenes. If you're comparing tools, please do the research to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Questions to ask yourself. You're like, okay, makes sense. They're not all built the same way statistically. What does that mean? Okay, questions to ask yourself. Big ones. One of the top ones, where I talk to a lot of people and they do not even know what these terms mean, is it sequential, or is it a fixed horizon approach relative to testing, or do they have both? On the topic of sequential, investigate thoroughly, because there are more and more tools out there these days that say that they have sequential testing. Convert actually just added sequential testing, I think within the last couple of months. Vlad can correct me if I'm wrong, which is amazing, because in my opinion, sequential is the way to go. But back to saying like tools have different offerings. Some tools actually do not have true sequential testing as an option. So know what you're signing up for. And again, if you don't know what these mean, let's talk, look it up. You should absolutely know what these mean. You should know the differences. I would push you towards sequential testing. It is the superior way, in my opinion. 2, is it using Bayesian or frequentist stats? I would say that this matters less as far as what they're actually using than sequential and fixed horizon. However, you should absolutely still know what they're using, when and where and how. And that way you can kind of understand accordingly, speak accordingly to the results, analyze accordingly, so on and so forth. Again, is the tool using a combination of these kind of in different ways? Lastly, not everyone uses multi-arm bandits, but please know what they are. Please know if the tool has that capability. And then there are different ways that tools are doing this math as well and using this. So please know that as well. As far as sequential and fixed horizon go, I think I'm going to skip this for now, but please do look into it, and you should know what this graph is saying and the differences. Next on my radar list is that research-based test ideation. So you'll be really surprised when teams go to come up with test ideas, how many teams are not using data really at all? They don't have any, or they just have analytics data and they're like, well, that's all we need. We have data, we're good. Wrong. Analytics data is like ground zero. I don't even count that, frankly, as research these days, because analytics, everyone has it. That's so obvious. Of course, we're using it. Everyone's using it. If you don't have an analytics tool, then you have bigger fish to fry as far as problems that you have. So maybe they'll use analytics, but then it's a lot of, well, we think, we feel, we believe, or our competitor is doing this. So we need to copy it. Or a blog post said this, or the best practice is blah, blah, blah. Use these, if these are coming out of your mouth, they should only be strategically and sparingly and in very intentional situations. You should know that you are doing this and that you're making a choice to do it over using other data. Data should be quantitative and qualitative, come from a number of different sources that I have on the next screen as examples. And the more data that you have to back an idea, the more confident that you can be in it, right? That makes sense, because the more things you have pointing to the idea that it makes sense, of course, you can have more confidence. And this should also tie into your prioritization. So if you're like, Haley, what is research? What type of data are you talking about? How do I get this? I like this visualization. It's not the end all be all, but it has a lot that are very common. So testing actually can fit under this bucket that makes it confusing to some people. So that's why you see it in there. Just maybe ignore that one if that would confuse your team. But analytics, user testing is a big one. User testing means a lot of different things. There's a lot of ways to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. But interviews, card sorting, tree testing, surveys, polls, the more you can do generally and the more often, the better. And if you can't do a whole bunch at once, I say just start with one above analytics. Like just have one thing and then kind of go out into more as you can and use that to inform your tests. Please, you'll have more winners. I bet money on it. I see it all the time, every time. And then if you want more information about this, obviously I'm very passionate about it, so I have a lot of content on it. Check out more from me here that I have linked. Next is pretest calculations. This is one thing that I would say I see most often that teams are not doing as well, that will level you up immediately if you start doing it. I will say it is one of, if not the most complicated technical concepts for teams to grasp most of the time. Don't let that scare you away. I just say that so that if you get into it and you get overwhelmed, like don't give up on it. It's imperative that you understand it so you can start doing it. And if you need some help, reach out to me, someone, so that you can get a process set up and going. And then once you have the process, you'll be fine. It's just like a machine that you can just do, no problem. It's actually really easy once you just get it going. But with pretest calculations, you're like, what does that even mean? That's so ambiguous. Well, here are the must-know points, and then I'll kind of go from here. This tells us if you can test at all, know that not all businesses can experiment, like I was saying earlier, because of data volume. It's not up to you whether you just want to or not. Do you have enough? This will say yes or no. Also, if you can test, know that not every page or screen or whatever you're testing on can be tested. Again, you have to have enough data volume. So if not everywhere you're looking to test has enough, you only test where you have enough. Everywhere else is out. Also, I'm going to say this a million times. You really should not test before you understand these calculations. So it's either a yes or no thing. It's binary. You either have enough somewhere, at least in one place, or you have enough data in multiple places. Great, then you can have a bigger program. If you don't have enough, you stop. You don't test. You do research only, other validation methods. Okay, so common struggles that these solve. I promise I will get into what this actually looks like. Common struggles is if you have test duration issues, if you don't know how long you're going to run a test, if you can't have duration estimates to help you with road mapping, if you're running tests forever and you don't know when to cut them, this will give you answers. Ideas are too small. So pretest calculations also tell you what idea size you need to have to give you the best chance at hitting significance. So let's say the pretest calculations in a lane tell you that you need to have a really big idea to give you the best shot, and you're testing like one word of copy on the page. Total waste of time. So if you didn't know that information before you launched a test and you're like, we're just going to run the one word of copy, I bet this is going to be amazing, and then the test is a total flop, you could have just avoided all of that in the first place and known that you needed a bigger idea before you even launched the test if you had done pretest calculations. Also, if you have trouble hitting significance, this will help. Also, road mapping, again, like figuring out about how long you're going to need to run tests so you can plan accordingly across a month, quarter, so on and so forth. So it essentially tells you if you could test at all, where you can test, what you can test, and how long to test. That's a lot of freaking things, right? Like the most important things that you need to know. A lot of teams don't know any of these answers before they test. What a problem, obviously. So how do you actually run these? 2 steps. Pull the analytics data, run them through a calculator. That's it. That is oversimplifying it a little bit. It does get nuanced and somewhat technical, but like I said, don't get overwhelmed. It's really that easy. Of course, going back to the stats models, not all calculators are the same, and there are a lot out there. So please understand the calculator that you're using, if it was built for sequential or fixed horizon testing, if it's using Bayesian or frequentist. If there is a calculator and it doesn't have that information visible about it, I would suggest reaching out to the owner of the calculator, whether it's a tool brand, an individual, whoever built it, and ask, get that information. So with that said, this is a calculator that I like. It is one of my favorites by far. It's from CXL. I linked it here. And this really is a great visualization of what all it tells you and showing how important these are. And I could go deep into this. Like I said, it's going to take longer than what we have in this, the rest of this time to explain. But if you need help with it, please reach out to me, reach out to someone. You need to be doing this. Number 4, I want to talk about your approach to test analyses because I see these done poorly a lot. And I want to say, again, please understand the statistics. I'm going to say that 100 times. Full disclosure, like I don't have a PhD in stats. I'm not a full-blown statistician. I never, ever want anyone to have that impression. But you do need to know enough to be able to do CRO in this work well, accurately, correctly. So when you're analyzing, you should understand the models and what's going on behind the data that you have. Again, ask these questions. Like I said here, you don't need a PhD in stats either, but know enough to be dangerous. Also, outside of that, relative to test analyses and outside of stats, there are some other just common like things that people get tripped up on or don't know about, or don't have perspectives and like opinions about. I would say this list, you should know about for sure, everything here. If you don't, that's a problem. But this is not all encompassing. There are plenty of other things, but this is a good starting point. Also on test analyses, I see that people feel like they need to write a novel in their post-test analyses and in their write-ups. I've seen 10-page Word documents in freaking 10-point font. Immediately, I'm just like, I already have a headache trying to go through this. My eyes already hurt. Like, no, that should not be the case. It really should not and does not have to be a write-up like this. Don't do it. Just stick to writing only relative to the hypothesis from the beginning of the test that you had and the numbers. This is what happens in these storytelling situations where you have paragraph after paragraph. People over extrapolate insights to the point that they are making a lot of assumptions. They're doing a lot of storytelling and often a lot of guessing and presenting things as fact when indeed they are not, which then also gets dangerous, right? Because you're passing this out to your teams. They're latching onto it. They're taking it exactly as you gave it to them, running with it. That's terrible. So just keep it very concise. Again, back to the hypothesis, back to the numbers. That's it. If it's short, that's how it's supposed to be. Okay, now we're getting to the end here. Test velocity. I would say this isn't at the top of the list to start tackling, but once you kind of get a little bit more into things, you need to have this on your radar. I would say it is one of the most underutilized levers for success and maximizing ROI that there is among teams. And what I mean by this is that it is, well, I'll just go to the next slide and show it and then maybe go back to the other one. So this is running the most amount of tests that you can at one time. And you're like, well, how do I know the max number of tests that I can run at one time? That comes from pre-test calculations, which is another reason they are so important and you must do them. Because look at this, if your maximum potential, velocity potential in a month is 3 tests, you can run 3 tests a month. Boom, boom, boom. So we see here, that's 9 variations or 9 tests in 3 months. If you are only doing tests one at a time, sequentially back to back, and you are not maxing that out, look how much different that is. You would only be testing 3 variations or 3 separate tests in 3 months. That's a crazy difference. That's insane. And then extrapolate that out over the course of a year. Holy shit. Like, this should say everything. So please, I think it's so underestimated and underconsidered. And you are absolutely wasting ROI potential if you are not maxing out test velocity. Also, you're wasting a lot of time. Here's a screenshot using that CXL calculator showing an example of where you start to look at velocity potential. Again, this is like a longer conversation. If you want to chat more about it, definitely reach out to me. Relative to road mapping, imagine you have 9 tests in here versus just 3. Like, your roadmap is going to be humongous for a year if you have, like a bigger program and you're maxing that out. Okay, last point. This may seem super obvious, but it is seriously not obvious to so many teams, which just blows my mind. So many teams are nonchalant about this, which is wild to me. But frankly, like some teams, we will have winning tests, winning variations, things from research that need to be executed, right? Like, the faster you execute, the faster you're going to start capitalizing on those wins and those learnings and those insights. Some teams are so slow to implement things from the time we need it implemented to actually doing it and actually taking action, or they don't implement it ever at all for whatever reason. So whether you're slow or you don't do it at all, why are you doing CRO in the first place? That is such a waste of resources and time and effort. That makes no sense to me. And like, even if you're slow, okay, like that's better than not doing it at all, but you're still wasting so much. So know that these things matter. Like, it's the end of the life cycle of something in CRO, but don't just let it fizzle out. This is just as important. Okay, so we're at the end of all my rants. This is a summary slide of this echo chamber situation. So I have the list of overcomplicated on the left, what needs more attention on the right. I do have my note about the overcomplicated things on the left, where I'm, again, not suggesting to ignore these, but perhaps just spending less effort and time on them. Hurry up, hash them out, make decisions. So we are going to get to some Q&A. I do want to mention that for the next 4 days through the end of August, Chirpy is running a limited time summer offer ending at the end of this Saturday. It's a research BOGO deal. Buy one service for research, get the other one free. So you double the insights and double the impact. And you can get a list of quick wins to finish your summer strong, and then also get you ahead for Q4 and even 2025. So if you're interested in this at all, reach out to me. I can give you the deets and we can see if it's a fit for you. And then lastly, BOGO deal aside or otherwise, if you want to talk about anything from this session or talk about Chirpy services, schedule a call with me or just email me, haley@mychirpy.com, and I would love to hear about what you have going on. So with that, I will shut up now and we can do some Q&A if there is any. So Vlad, maybe if you have questions that you've seen that I've missed, or we can try and call some people out. It's up to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Haley, for sharing your expertise and helping us rethink where to focus our CRO efforts. I don't think there are any questions yet, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to add them to our LinkedIn event, and Haley would be more than happy to address those. And that brings us to the end of what has been an incredibly insightful session. And before we wrap up, I would like to take a moment to tell you a bit about Convert. At Convert, we believe that experimentation is a human nature, and we're here to help you harness with tools that are reliable, transparent, and human-centered. Wherever you're looking to grow your business, understand your customers, or better streamline your processes, we've got a solution to make experimentation easier. And our commitment goes just beyond offering a product. We're a cautious business that puts people first, ensuring that when you work with us, you're not just getting a service, but you're joining a community that cares about doing good and making a positive impact. If you found tonight's session valuable, I encourage you to stay connected with us. We regularly host events like this, where you can learn from industry leaders and get some practical tips. Thanks again for joining us tonight, Vlad, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you so much, Haley. It has been an incredible pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Bye, guys. Have a good one.